The Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. A date that would forever change the course of human history. A date when the most powerful man in the world would fall not on a battlefield, but in the halls of the very institution he sought to reform. This is the story of how Rome's greatest general, the man who conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and transformed the Republic into an empire, met his end at the hands of his friends. This is the story of the murder of Julius Caesar. But this wasn't just an assassination. It was a conspiracy years in the making. A betrayal so profound that its echoes would inspire Shakespeare, influence revolutions, and define the word treachery for millennia to come. Because the murder of Julius Caesar wasn't simply about one man's death. It was about the death of an entire political system and the birth of something far more dangerous. To understand why Caesar was murdered, we must first understand what he had become. By 44 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar was untouchable. He had conquered Gaul, modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany, expanding Rome's territory by millions of square miles. He had crossed the Rhine, bridged the English Channel, and brought the legendary wealth of barbarian lands flowing into Roman coffers. He had defeated his greatest rival, Pompey the Great, in a brutal civil war that left no question about who ruled Rome. He had been declared dictator, not once, not twice, but perpetually. Dictator for life. A title that spit in the face of 500 years of republican tradition. Rome had been built on the idea that no single man should hold absolute power. The Republic was designed with checks and balances, consuls who shared authority, and term limits that ensured rotation of leadership. But Caesar had shattered those safeguards. He appointed senators without election. He extended his own powers through legislation only he could propose. He placed his image on coins, something reserved only for gods and dead heroes. He accepted honors that bordered on worship. Temples were built in his name. Priests were assigned to his cult. His statues stood beside those of the ancient kings Rome had overthrown centuries earlier. To the people, Caesar was a hero. He provided land for veterans, grain for the poor, spectacular games and entertainment. He reformed the calendar, restructured debt, and expanded citizenship. But to the Senate, the aristocratic families who had ruled Rome for generations, Caesar was something far worse than a dictator. He was a king in all but name. And Rome had sworn never to bow to a king again. The conspiracy began quietly, in whispered conversations in private homes, in coded messages passed between trusted allies, in the bitter hearts of men who had once called Caesar friend. The leader of the conspiracy was a man named Gaius Cassius Longinus. Cassius was a senator, a military commander, and a man with a deep personal grudge against Caesar. He had fought alongside Pompey during the Civil War and had been pardoned by Caesar afterward, a mercy that felt more like humiliation than forgiveness. Cassius despised Caesar's power. He despised the cult of personality that surrounded him. He despised the way Caesar had turned the Senate into a rubber stamp for his ambitions. But Cassius was smart enough to know that one man alone could not kill Caesar. The dictator was surrounded by loyal soldiers, protected by bodyguards, adored by the masses. Any assassin acting alone would be caught, tortured, and executed before the blade even struck. No, this had to be a group effort. A conspiracy large enough to ensure success, but small enough to avoid leaks. And it needed a figurehead, someone whose name carried weight, someone whose honor was beyond question, someone whose participation would legitimize the entire plot. That man was Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was everything Cassius needed. He was respected, educated, philosophical, a man who valued the Republic above all else, or so he claimed. He was also Caesar's closest friend. Some historians even whispered that Brutus might have been Caesar's illegitimate son, the product of Caesar's long affair with Brutus's mother, Servilia. Whether or not this was true, Caesar treated Brutus like a son. He promoted him, protected him, forgave him when Brutus sided with Pompey during the Civil War. Caesar trusted Brutus completely, and that trust would be his downfall. Cassius approached Brutus carefully. He knew Brutus was conflicted, torn between loyalty to Caesar and loyalty to the ideals of the Republic. So Cassius planted seeds of doubt. He reminded Brutus of his ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, who had overthrown the last king of Rome 500 years earlier and founded the Republic. He sent Brutus anonymous letters, supposedly from concerned citizens, begging him to save Rome from tyranny. He appealed to Brutus's sense of honor, his love of philosophy, his devotion to the Republic. And slowly, Brutus began to crack. He convinced himself that killing Caesar wasn't murder. It was duty. It was sacrifice. It was the only way to save Rome from becoming a monarchy. And once Brutus agreed, the conspiracy gained legitimacy. Other senators joined. Decimus Brutus, a trusted general of Caesar; Gaius Trebonius, another military commander; Tullius Cimber, a senator with his own grievances. Eventually, the conspiracy swelled to over 60 men, 60 senators, 60 knives, 60 men willing to commit the ultimate act of political violence. But they needed the perfect moment, a time when Caesar would be vulnerable, a place where they could strike without interference from his guards. That moment came on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. The Senate was scheduled to meet that day in the Theater of Pompey, a grand building that served as a temporary Senate house, while the Curia, the traditional meeting place, was under renovation. The location was symbolic. Pompey had been Caesar's greatest rival, and now Caesar would die in a building bearing Pompey's name. But the conspirators knew that getting close to Caesar would be difficult. He was protected by a personal bodyguard of Spanish soldiers. He was surrounded by supporters and admirers wherever he went. They needed a way to isolate him, to separate him from his guards, to ensure that when they struck, no one could intervene. The plan was simple but brilliant. They would use the Senate meeting itself as cover. Senators were allowed to carry daggers, small weapons used for self-defense and ceremonial purposes. The conspirators would wait until Caesar was seated. Then they would surround him, under the pretense of presenting petitions. And when the moment was right, they would strike, all of them, together, so that no single man bore the full guilt. So that it was the Senate, not individuals, who killed the tyrant. The morning of March 15th began with omens. Dark, terrible omens that any Roman would recognize as warnings from the gods. Caesar's wife Calpurnia woke screaming from a nightmare. She had dreamed that she held Caesar's bleeding body in her arms, that the statue of her husband erected in front of their home poured blood like a fountain, that Romans bathed their hands in it celebrating. She begged Caesar not to go to the Senate that day, begged him to stay home, to postpone the meeting, to listen to the warnings. Caesar, normally superstitious, was inclined to agree. But then Decimus Brutus arrived. Decimus, one of the conspirators, one of Caesar's most trusted generals. He mocked Caesar's fears. He reminded him that the Senate was waiting. He told him that postponing would make Caesar look weak, afraid, controlled by a woman's dreams. He appealed to Caesar's pride. And Caesar, swayed by his friend's words, agreed to go. As Caesar left his home, a soothsayer, a fortune-teller who had warned him weeks earlier, approached him in the street. "Beware the Ides of March," the man had said. Caesar, seeing him again, laughed. "The Ides of March have come," he said. Caesar," the soothsayer replied, "but not gone." Caesar ignored him and continued toward the Senate. Along the way, a man pressed a note into his hand, a warning, a list of the conspirators' names, a desperate attempt to save his life. Caesar took the note, but never read it. There were always petitions, always pleas, always requests. He tucked it away, intending to read it later. There would be no later. When Caesar arrived at the Theater of Pompey, the conspirators were waiting. The Senate session began normally. Senators debated. Petitions were presented. Caesar sat in his gilded chair, the chair reserved for Rome's dictator, positioned in front of a massive statue of Pompey. The irony was almost poetic. Then Tullius Cimber approached Caesar with a petition. He asked Caesar to recall his exiled brother. Caesar refused. Cimber persisted, moving closer, grabbing Caesar's toga, pulling it down from his shoulders. This was the signal. The other conspirators closed in. Casca struck first. His dagger aimed for Caesar's neck, but only grazed his shoulder. Caesar spun, grabbing Casca's arm. "Teacher, what are you doing?" Caesar shouted in Greek. the language of the educated elite. Then the others attacked. Swords flashed, daggers plunged, blood sprayed across white marble. Caesar fought back, using his stylus, a metal writing instrument, as a weapon, striking at his attackers. But there were too many. 23 stab wounds, 23 senators, 23 blades tearing through flesh. Caesar stumbled, trying to escape, but his toga tangled around his legs. He fell at the base of Pompey's statue. And then he saw Brutus. Brutus, his friend. Brutus, who he had forgiven, protected, promoted. Brutus, who now held a blood-stained dagger. Their eyes met, and Caesar spoke his final words. "Et tu, Brute?" You too, Brutus? Some historians dispute whether Caesar actually said this. Some claim his last words were in Greek, "Kaisu, teknon," you too, child? Others say he said nothing at all, simply pulling his toga over his head so he wouldn't have to see his killers' faces. But the truth doesn't matter as much as the legend, because those words, "Et tu, Brute," became the ultimate symbol of betrayal, the ultimate expression of heartbreak in the face of treachery. Caesar collapsed. His body crumpled at the foot of Pompey's statue. Blood pooled around him, so much blood that it flowed down the steps of the Senate floor. The conspirators stood frozen for a moment, staring at what they had done. Then chaos erupted. Senators who weren't part of the conspiracy fled in terror. Some thought they would be killed next. Others simply ran from the violence. The conspirators, covered in blood, raised their daggers and shouted about liberty and freedom. They marched through the streets of Rome, expecting to be hailed as heroes. They expected the people to celebrate. They expected gratitude. They expected Rome to thank them for killing the tyrant. But that's not what happened. The Roman people were horrified. Caesar had been their champion. He had given them land, grain, entertainment. He had fought for them, bled for them, conquered for them. And now he lay dead, butchered by the very senators who had always looked down on the common people. The conspirators retreated to the Capitoline Hill, barricading themselves inside, suddenly realizing they had misjudged everything. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and co-consul, disappeared. Fearing he would be next, Antony disguised himself as a slave and fled. For hours, Rome held its breath. What would happen next? Would there be more bloodshed? Would the army revolt? Would civil war consume the Republic once again? Caesar's body lay abandoned in the Senate for hours. Finally, 3 slaves carried it home on a litter, one arm hanging down, dragging on the ground. When the people saw Caesar's corpse being carried through the streets, their grief turned to rage. The next day, Mark Antony did something brilliant. He held a public funeral for Caesar in the Roman Forum, and he gave a speech that would change everything. Antony didn't condemn the conspirators directly. He simply read Caesar's will. Caesar had left gardens to the people of Rome. He had left money to every citizen. He had remembered the common people even in death. Then Antony displayed Caesar's body, the bloody, mutilated corpse with 23 stab wounds. He pointed to each wound. He named each conspirator. He let the people see what the senators had done to their hero. The crowd exploded. Riots erupted. Mobs hunted down anyone associated with the conspiracy. They burned the houses of senators. They attacked anyone who defended the assassins. They built a massive funeral pyre in the Forum and cremated Caesar's body, the flames visible for miles. The conspirators had killed Caesar, but they had lost Rome. Brutus and Cassius fled the city, eventually raising armies in the east. Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, hunted them down. 2 years later, at the Battle of Philippi, Brutus and Cassius were defeated. Both committed suicide rather than face capture. Brutus's last words were reportedly a bitter acknowledgement of his failure. "Virtue, I have followed you all my life, but you were only a name." The Republic the conspirators had tried to save died with Caesar. Within decades, Octavian would become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Roman Empire had begun, and it all started with 23 daggers on the Ides of March. The murder of Julius Caesar is one of history's most famous assassinations. but it's also one of history's greatest failures. The conspirators killed Caesar believing they could restore the Republic. Instead, they guaranteed its destruction. They thought they were heroes. History remembers them as traitors. They thought they could turn back time, but time only moved forward, toward empire, toward dictatorship, toward everything they feared. Because the truth is, the Republic was already dead. Caesar didn't kill it. He was simply the man willing to admit it. The conspirators couldn't accept that Rome had changed, that the old system no longer worked, that the people preferred strong leadership over corrupt senators, so they murdered the man who represented that change. And in doing so, they made him a martyr. They made him eternal. Caesar's name would become synonymous with absolute power. Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian, both derived from Caesar. His death inspired Shakespeare's greatest tragedy. His betrayal by Brutus became the ultimate symbol of treachery. His final words, whether real or legendary, became immortal. The Ides of March. A warning, a reminder. A day that proves sometimes the greatest dangers come not from enemies, but from friends. Not from the battlefield, but from the halls of power. Not from those who hate us, but from those we trust. Julius Caesar conquered Gaul. He crossed the Rubicon. He defeated Pompey. He became the most powerful man in the world. But he could not conquer the fear of 60 senators. He could not cross the divide between friend and foe. He could not defeat the knives hidden beneath togas. On March 15th, 44 BC, the greatest general Rome had ever known fell. Not in battle, not with honor, but surrounded by men he called brothers, bleeding out on cold marble, staring into the eyes of his best friend, whispering 3 words that would echo through eternity. Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? The Ides of March came, and Julius Caesar fell. But his legend? His legend would never die.